Harper Lewis never believed in fairy tales, especially not the kind that started with a marriage contract and ended with heartbreak. But when a billionaire tech mogul walked into her life offering $4 million for a fake one-year marriage, she didn't hesitate. Her father was dying. Her research was underfunded. And Graham Whitmore? He just needed a wife on paper to secure his empire. They had rules. No feelings. No strings. No future. But one rainy night, one accidental kiss, and one secret later, everything changed. 5 years later, Harper is a single mom with a daughter who's bright, stubborn, and hiding a life-threatening genetic condition. She thought she'd closed that chapter for good. Until she walks into a clinic and comes face to face with the man she once married, and the father her daughter never knew. What happens when the lines between contract and connection blur? When betrayal runs deeper than love, but love refuses to die quietly? This isn't just a story about inheritance or survival. It's about the lies we tell to protect the ones we love, and the second chances fate only gives to the brave. Stay till the end, because the last twist? You won't see it coming. Harper Lewis had always believed that hard work and brilliance were enough. She wasn't wrong, just naive. With a PhD in biomedical research and papers published in prestigious journals, she should have been leading clinical trials, not skipping meals to stretch her grocery budget. But the reality was cruel. Cutting-edge science didn't pay the bills, especially not when your father was terminally ill and the insurance company labeled every new treatment as experimental. Her Chicago apartment was barely livable. She spent nights sleeping on the hospital cot next to her father, days bouncing between underfunded labs and debt collection calls. The numbers didn't lie. Her father's cancer treatment would cost over $300,000, and she had maybe $312 to her name. Hope was wearing thin. Across the city, Graham Whitmore was dying. Billionaire. CEO. Household name. But no amount of tech deals or skyscrapers could buy him a cure for the rare genetic disorder slowly eating away at his nervous system. Doctors had given him 18 months, maybe less. The only thing more brutal than the diagnosis was the clause in his late grandfather's will: to retain control of Whitmore Innovations, Graham had to be married and have a legitimate heir. He didn't believe in love. He barely believed in people. But he believed in control, and the thought of his corrupt brother inheriting everything made him sick. Their worlds collided on a gray Thursday afternoon, in a penthouse office Harper had no business being in. She thought it was a job interview. Instead, she was handed a contract. "Marry me," Graham said, his tone more business proposal than romantic. "For 1 year. Strictly professional. You'll receive $2 million upfront, the rest upon completion. You'll live in my home, attend a few charity galas, play the doting wife, and never fall in love." Harper stared at the contract like it might bite her. It wasn't just insane, it was surreal. A fake marriage? To a dying man? She should have walked away. But her father's face came to mind, the fear in his eyes, the pain in his voice, the hopelessness. And then Harper looked across the desk at Graham, powerful, icy, untouchable, and just as desperate as she was, in his own way. She said yes. No one would ever know it wasn't real. They would smile for the cameras. Wear the rings. Share a name. And when the year was over, they'd go their separate ways. Simple. Clean. Controlled. But fate doesn't follow contracts. And neither do hearts. Because what started as a transaction between two broken people was about to become the one thing neither of them had planned for. Real. The first few weeks of the contract marriage felt exactly like what it was, an arrangement. Harper moved into Graham's sprawling penthouse, where her suite was bigger than her entire apartment and had a view of Lake Michigan that made her feel like she was living in a magazine spread. There were designer clothes waiting in the closet, staff who addressed her as Mrs. Whitmore, and scheduled appearances where she was expected to smile, nod, and play the polished wife of a billionaire. She hated every second of it. But she kept showing up, because her father was getting better. The treatments she could now afford were working. And that, more than the penthouse or the money, gave her reason to keep playing the part. Still, something unexpected began to shift. Graham wasn't the emotionless shark she'd imagined. Beneath the cold exterior was a man haunted by his past, terrified of the future, and, when no one was looking, capable of disarming wit and rare vulnerability. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he listened like the world depended on it. He asked about her research and actually understood it. He made sure her father's hospital room had every comfort possible, without saying a word about it. He never touched her. Never asked for more than what the contract required. But the silence between them grew warm, not cold. Familiar. Intimate. Late at night, she'd find him in the library, reading, thinking, drinking his aged scotch like it might slow time. Sometimes, he'd ask her to stay. They'd sit by the fire for hours, exchanging stories, or just existing in quiet companionship. The walls they'd built between each other began to crumble, brick by brick, moment by moment. And Harper, against all logic, all warnings, all contracts, started falling for the man she wasn't supposed to feel anything for. But she carried a secret. Graham didn't know that the disease slowly killing him, this rare, inherited condition, was the same one that had taken Harper's mother. He didn't know Harper had been researching it obsessively for years, that her entire career was built around unlocking its mysteries. He didn't know her most recent grant proposal was rejected because reviewers believed she was chasing a genetic ghost. And he definitely didn't know that when she said yes to his marriage offer, she'd already been following his medical history, because his case matched her mother's in alarming detail. It wasn't about the money. Not entirely. Harper had come into the arrangement believing she could keep her heart and her motives separate. She would take the deal, save her father, and maybe, just maybe, get a front row seat to understanding the very disease that might live in her own DNA. But now she was sharing her life with Graham. Her laughter. Her secrets. Her presence. And every day, it got harder to tell the truth. Because the more she cared about him, the more she feared he would never forgive what she'd kept hidden. It unraveled faster than she ever imagined. One morning, Harper walked into Graham's office to find him standing behind his desk, a file in hand, jaw clenched so tight she could see the tension ripple down his neck. He didn't look at her right away. He just said, flatly, "How long have you been researching my condition?" The blood drained from her face. She tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. She had rehearsed this moment in her head for months, but not like this. Not with Graham's voice so cold, not with those files, her old grant proposals, notes, research history, spread out across his desk like damning evidence. "You were studying me before we ever met," he said quietly, flipping through the pages. "You knew who I was. You knew what I had. And you married me anyway." "No," she said, barely above a whisper. "It wasn't like that." "Don't lie to me, Harper," he snapped, eyes blazing now. "You used me. I was your meal ticket and your lab rat all wrapped in one neat billionaire package, wasn't I?" She shook her head, tears welling. "I didn't know who you were when I started. I didn't plan this. I didn't plan us." "But you knew," he cut her off. "And you didn't tell me. Not once. Not even when I asked why this field mattered to you." That's when she realized he wasn't angry because of the science. He was angry because he'd let her in. He'd started to believe in something real. And now, it felt like manipulation. Graham Whitmore didn't yell. He didn't beg. He simply ended it like he closed a deal, swiftly and surgically. "I want to return to the original terms," he said, his voice now back to business. "Public appearances only. The contract stands, but this, whatever this was, is over." And just like that, it was. 3 weeks later, Harper stood in a sterile courthouse, signing divorce papers in silence. Graham didn't even attend, his legal team handled everything. The ring, the sweet, the soft moments, they were all gone. She took her reduced payout and left with nothing but a broken heart and a man who now saw her as the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't until 2 months later, in a doctor's office downtown, that Harper found out she was pregnant. She stared at the grainy ultrasound screen, her heart pounding louder than the heartbeat echoing through the room. A daughter. Graham's daughter. A child who might carry the same genetic time bomb that had cursed her family for generations. She could have called him. Could have told him the truth. But she didn't. Because the last time she looked into Graham's eyes, she didn't see the man she once loved. She saw judgment. Distance. Fury. And Harper had spent her whole life trying to protect the people she loved from pain. Even if it meant keeping them apart. So she walked away. No goodbye. No explanations. Just a quiet vow to raise her child with love, strength, and the truth one day. 5 years slipped by, but Harper never forgot. Not the weight of Graham's silence. Not the shape of his absence. And definitely not the secret she carried every day, a daughter with sharp blue eyes, a quick wit, and a stubborn streak that mirrored his in every impossible way. Ivy was her world. Brilliant. Fearless. Unapologetically 5.5 going on 30. And until now, she'd been healthy. But recently, there had been tremors. Nosebleeds. Moments of unexplained fatigue. Harper's research instincts kicked in first, then her fear. So she took Ivy to the one place in the city equipped to handle complex hereditary disorders, the Whitmore Foundation Clinic. She'd avoided it for years, avoided him, but now, there was no room for pride. Only the urgency of a mother desperate for answers. Harper was signing intake forms when the exam room door opened and her world tilted. Graham stood there, flanked by a senior physician. His hair was streaked with silver now, and his face was leaner, etched with time and fatigue. But the moment his eyes locked onto Harper's, everything else disappeared. The clipboard slipped from his hand. "Harper," he said, like a breath he hadn't meant to speak aloud. Then his gaze shifted, and landed on Ivy. And in that single heartbeat, everything changed. He saw it immediately. The impossible truth standing 3 feet tall in sparkly sneakers, holding a stuffed llama, looking up at him with his eyes. Ivy tilted her head. "Hi. I'm Ivy. Are you sick too?" Graham dropped to one knee, slowly, like the air had been knocked from his lungs. She stepped closer, unafraid. "You look like me," she said simply. Harper stood frozen, unable to breathe. The thing she'd feared, planned to delay until Ivy was older, was now happening in real time, with no warning and no way out. Graham looked up at Harper, voice rough. "She's mine." Harper's mouth opened. Closed. "Yes," she whispered. "She's yours." He stood slowly, like the weight of those words had both broken him and rebuilt him at once. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Not angry. Not yet. Just wounded. "I was trying to protect her," Harper said. "From everything. From you. From me. From your world." Ivy looked between them, sensing the tension. "Mommy, is this one of your old friends?" Harper crouched beside her. "Yes, sweetheart. A very old friend." Graham knelt too, just inches away now. "Would it be okay if I sat with you for a little while?" he asked her softly. Ivy nodded, like it was the most natural thing in the world. So he did. And for the next few minutes, Graham Whitmore sat beside his daughter for the very first time. Listening. Smiling. Learning. Haunted. Because for all the money he'd made, the empires he'd built, he'd missed the most important creation of all. And now, he would do anything, not to lose her again. The moment Graham left that clinic, he made 2 phone calls. one to his legal team, the other to his private medical advisor. Within 24 hours, Harper and Ivy were moved into a secure, private suite at the Whitmore estate. No press, no distractions, no risks. Graham knew what was coming. Because if he knew Ethan, his younger brother, his oldest rival, Ethan wouldn't take kindly to the existence of a legitimate heir that stood between him and billions. And he was right. The next week, Ethan filed a motion with the Whitmore Enterprises board, questioning the legitimacy of Ivy's paternity and accusing Harper of orchestrating a research-driven pregnancy scheme. He called it fraud. Claimed Harper was manipulating Graham into fatherhood to regain access to Whitmore's fortune and to further her biotech agenda. But this time, Graham wasn't cold or detached. This time, he fought. In court, his attorneys produced genetic proof confirming Ivy was, without question, his biological daughter. More than that, Graham testified, under oath, that Harper had never once asked for money, access, or power. She had raised Ivy alone, with no demands, no threats, and no attempts to leverage her daughter's bloodline. The courtroom fell silent when Graham looked directly at the judge and said, "I wasn't deceived. I was given a second chance. And I'll spend the rest of my life protecting it." The board ruled swiftly. Ivy was the rightful heir to the Whitmore legacy. Ethan was stripped of voting privileges and placed under investigation for embezzlement and prior tampering with Graham's medical treatments. It was a quiet takedown, precise, public, and permanent. But that wasn't the only battle Graham was waging. Behind the scenes, he had poured millions into Harper's stalled research, the very gene therapy protocols she'd been developing before they ever met. Her work had once been dismissed as unfundable. Now, it had state-of-the-art labs, elite scientists, and no bureaucratic red tape in sight. Because Ivy wasn't just his daughter. She was his mirror. And she had the same condition Graham did. The same countdown clock in her DNA. Every breakthrough Harper made in the lab could buy Ivy time. Could buy Graham time. Could save them both. And for Harper, that mattered more than vindication. She'd spent years carrying guilt, hiding truths, living in the shadow of a contract that had once defined her. But now, standing in that lab as results rolled in, real progress, real hope, she felt something new. Purpose. Pride. Peace. One night, after Ivy had fallen asleep surrounded by science books and stuffed animals, Harper found Graham in the library, the same room where everything had once begun. He looked up from a medical report, smiled faintly, and said, "Your research might actually work." Harper sat beside him. "You always were my best subject." They laughed quietly. Then sat in silence. Not the kind that separates people. The kind that means something has been healed. The kind that only comes when justice is done, and redemption is real. The contract had long since expired. The lies and secrets had been dragged into the light, one by one. What remained, somehow, was love. Not the clean, scripted kind Harper used to write off as fantasy. But the raw kind. The earned kind. The kind that had weathered betrayal, illness, custody battles, and a courtroom war, and survived. Ivy's treatment was working. Her energy returned. Her giggles echoed through the halls of the Whitmore estate like music neither of them knew they'd been missing. She decorated the library with crayon drawings. Called Graham Dad without hesitation. Took Harper's hand in one and Graham's in the other, like it had always been that way. One crisp Sunday morning, Graham invited Harper and Ivy out to the newly renovated rooftop garden. It was a quiet corner of the city, filled with ivy-covered trellises and sun-warmed stone benches. Harper didn't think anything of it until she saw the ring box. Not sleek like their first deal. Not cold. This one was velvet and trembling in his hand. Graham knelt, not as a CEO, not as a man with a timeline on his life, but as a father, as a partner, as someone who had finally learned how to hope. "I don't want a contract this time," he said. "No conditions. No expiration date. Just you. Us. A family. Forever. Harper blinked, breath caught. Graham, we're not perfect. No, he said, eyes steady. But we're real. Ivy gasped. Is this like when princes ask princesses to marry them? Because this feels very princess-y. Harper laughed, a sound that came from someplace deeper than her lungs. Then she looked at Graham, this man who once thought love was a liability, and she nodded. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes to the messy, beautiful, impossible life we've built. Ivy clapped like it was a fairy tale. Can I wear purple to the wedding? Only if I can, Graham replied with a grin. They embraced, three people who'd once been strangers, now held together not by paperwork, but by something no court could draft and no illness could destroy. Later that evening, Harper stood at the kitchen sink, watching Graham help Ivy build a solar system model out of glitter and glue. She smiled through tears, her chest full of something she hadn't let herself feel in years, peace. The contract had brought them together. Love made them stay. Not because it was easy, but because somewhere between pretending and pain, between firelight conversations and midnight hospital runs, they had found something real. A family. A future. And for the first time in a long time, Harper believed they just might have forever.